He never posted me. Not once. At first, I didn't think it mattered. Some people just don't share their relationships online. That's what he told me. And it made sense. So, I didn't question it. Until one day, I saw a notification. Not on his phone. On mine. His name. Tagged in a photo. By someone I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it was nothing. Just a friend. Just a random post. But then I opened it. And the caption didn't match that. Neither did the comments. Or the way she was standing next to him. Like none of it was new. That was the moment I realized something. He wasn't private. He was just private with me. And whatever I thought our relationship was, wasn't the same version he was showing everywhere else. My name is Ava. I'm 27 now, and at the time all of this happened, I had been with my boyfriend for a little over a year. Our relationship wasn't dramatic. It was calm in a way that made it easy to trust. He wasn't overly expressive, not the type to post everything or share much publicly, but he was consistent in person. And for a long time that felt like enough. His name was Ryan. He was quiet, kept a small circle, didn't spend much time on social media, at least not in a visible way. That's how he explained it. He said he preferred to keep things private, that he didn't like putting his life online. And I accepted that, because it matched what I saw. He didn't post much. No constant updates, no personal captions, nothing that suggested he was active in that way. So when it came to us, it didn't feel strange that I wasn't there. No pictures. No mentions. Nothing public. At the time, I told myself that meant something good. That what we had didn't need to be shown to be real. And when you believe that, you don't question the absence of things. You treat it as intentional. As meaningful. Looking back, that's probably why I didn't notice certain things earlier. Because nothing felt hidden. It just felt quiet. We spent time together regularly. Weekdays when our schedules matched. Weekends when we had more time. Nothing excessive. Just enough to feel consistent. He showed up when he said he would. He stayed present when we were together. There was no obvious distance. No signs of distraction. And that kind of behavior makes it easy to trust someone without asking for more. There were small moments, though. Things I noticed but didn't hold on to. Like how he never took pictures when we were out. Not even casually. If I did, he would be in them, but he never asked for them. Never reposted them. Never engaged with that side of things at all. At the time, it matched his explanation. He just wasn't that kind of person. So I didn't push it. There were also times when I would bring up social media indirectly. Not as a concern. Just as part of conversation. And he would respond the same way every time. He didn't care about it. Didn't see the point. Preferred real life over anything online. And again, that made sense. Because everything else about him felt aligned with that. His life didn't revolve around visibility. It revolved around routine. That's what I believed. And when everything else feels stable, you don't question the parts that are missing. You assume they're intentional. You assume they're part of who the person is. I remember one moment that stands out now. We were out one evening, nothing special, just dinner and a walk after. And a couple nearby asked us to take their picture. After I handed their phone back, the woman smiled and asked if we wanted one too. It was a simple question. Normal. And for a second I considered it. Then I looked at Ryan. And he hesitated. Not long. Just enough. Then he said no. That he wasn't really into pictures. The moment passed quickly. We kept walking. We kept talking. Nothing changed. But I remember thinking about that hesitation for a few seconds. Then letting it go. Because it didn't feel important enough to question. It didn't break anything. It didn't contradict anything. It just existed. And that's how most of those moments felt. Small. Unimportant. Easy to dismiss. Because the overall picture still made sense. We were together. We spent time together. Nothing about the relationship felt incomplete in real life. So I didn't look for confirmation outside of it. I didn't need it. At least, that's what I thought. Because everything still felt consistent. Everything still fit the version of him I believed in. The one who didn't care about social media. The one who preferred privacy. The one who didn't need to show anything to prove it was real. And I stayed in that version of things. The one where nothing was missing. The one where everything made sense. Until I saw something that didn't fit into that version at all. And once that happened, I couldn't go back to seeing it the same way again. The first time I saw it, I didn't react. Not immediately. It was just a notification. His name. Tagged in a photo. And at first, it didn't feel important enough to stop everything. People get tagged all the time. Friends. Coworkers. Random moments. So I opened it without thinking too much about it. Just curiosity. Nothing else. The photo loaded. And for a second, it looked normal. Him standing next to a girl. Close enough to notice. But not close enough to question right away. That was my first thought. That it could be explained. That there was context I didn't have yet. But then I looked a little longer. At the way they were standing. Not distant. Not casual. Comfortable. Like it wasn't new. Like it had already been established. That's when I noticed the caption. Short. Simple. But specific. Something about another perfect night. And that was the first thing that didn't fit. Because that night, he had told me he was busy. Something about work. Something that made sense at the time. Something I hadn't questioned. But now it didn't line up. I didn't react right away. I didn't message him. I didn't even close the post. I just stayed there, looking at it, letting it settle, because it didn't match the version of things I had. And when something doesn't match, your first instinct is to fix it, to make it make sense. So, I tried. Maybe it was old. Maybe it was posted late. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. That's what I told myself. Because that's easier than accepting something immediately. But then I looked at the timestamp. Recent, not delayed, not old. Exactly when it shouldn't have been. That's when something shifted. Not emotionally, just logically. Because now it wasn't about interpretation. It was about contradiction. I tapped on the girl's profile. Not quickly. Not aggressively. Just to see. And at first it still felt manageable. Just another account. Just another person. But then I scrolled. And that's when things started to change. There were more photos. Not hundreds. Not excessive. But enough. Enough to show consistency. Different days. Different places. And in several of them, he was there. Not in the background. Not randomly included. Present. Centered. Like he belonged in those moments. That's when I slowed down. Because I realized something. This wasn't something I could understand quickly. It wasn't one post. It was a series. A pattern. So I started looking at the details. Dates. Clothing. Locations. Trying to match them with what I knew. And that's when it became harder to ignore. One photo matched a day. He told me he was out with friends. Another matched a day he said he was working late. And another. A day I remembered clearly because we had talked that evening. And he had told me he was tired. At home. Not going out. But the photo showed something else entirely. That was the moment the pattern became undeniable. Because it wasn't one contradiction. It was multiple. Lined up across different days. Different explanations. Same outcome. I kept scrolling, even though I already knew what it meant. Because once you start seeing something like that, you don't stop at the first confirmation. You follow it. You need to understand how far it goes. There were comments under the photos. People reacting. Joking. Responding like this was normal. Like they had seen this before. That was the part that stayed with me. Not just that he was there, but that it wasn't hidden. It was visible, recognized, accepted, just not in my direction. I went back to the first photo again. Looked at it differently now, not trying to understand it, just seeing it for what it was. And it felt different, clearer, because now it wasn't a question. It was part of a pattern I could already see. I noticed how she stood next to him. Not uncertain, Not new. Comfortable. Like there was history there. That's something you don't fake in one picture. That comes from repetition. From time. And that realization sat differently. Because it meant this wasn't recent. This wasn't accidental. This had been happening long enough to look natural. And that changed everything. I didn't confront him. I didn't send anything. I didn't even close the app right away. I just sat there, letting everything settle into place. Because once something becomes that clear, there's no need to rush. You already know. The only thing left is understanding how much of it is real, and how much of what you believed wasn't. That was the shift. Not emotional, not dramatic, just precise. Because now I wasn't trying to figure out if something was wrong. I already knew something was. The only question left was, how long had this been visible? While I was the only one who couldn't see it. Once I saw it clearly, I couldn't go back to how it looked before. It didn't feel confusing anymore. It felt structured, like something that had been there the entire time, just outside of where I was looking. I didn't confront him. I didn't ask questions. Because I already knew what would happen. He would explain it, minimize it, give me something simple enough to accept. And I wasn't interested in that anymore. I wanted to understand it fully. So I kept going, back through her profile, further than I had the first time. Not quickly, not emotionally, just carefully. Because once you realize it's a pattern, you stop looking at individual moments and start looking at consistency. I scrolled back weeks, then months, and the pattern stayed the same. Not constant, not every day, but regular enough, frequent enough, enough to build something that looked established. There were photos in different places, different outfits, different days, and in many of them, he was there, sometimes closer, sometimes just beside her, but always present. Always included in a way that didn't feel accidental. That was the first thing I focused on. Presence. Because presence means time. And time means this was anew. I started checking dates more closely, matching them with my own memory, with things he had told me. And that's when it became clearer. These weren't random overlaps. They lined up with specific explanations. Days he said he was busy. Days he said he was working. Days he said he was with friends. And in each of those, there was a version of him somewhere else. That was the shift. Because now it wasn't about one contradiction. It was about multiple versions of the same timeline, existing at the same time. And only one of them included me. I noticed something else too. The tone of the posts. Not just the pictures. The captions. The comments. They weren't neutral. They weren't casual. There was familiarity there. A kind of ongoing connection. References to previous nights. Plans that seem to continue. Small details that only make sense if something has been happening consistently. That's when I understood something clearly. This wasn't a situation. It was a relationship. Not defined openly. Not labeled directly. But present. Visible. Recognized by everyone in that space. Except me. That realization didn't feel dramatic. It felt quiet. Like something settling into place. Because once you see that level of consistency, you don't question what it means. You accept it. I kept scrolling. Not because I needed more proof, but because I needed to see the full extent of it. How far it went. How often it happened. And the answer was consistent. Not hidden. Not complicated. Just repeated. That's what made it different. If it had been 1 or 2 moments, it could have been explained. If it had been unclear, it could have been questioned. But this wasn't either of those. It was structured, predictable, and visible, just not in the part of his life I was in. I went back to his profile after that, looked at it differently, not for what was there, but for what wasn't. No photos of us, no mentions, no trace of anything that connected him to me. And for the first time, that absence felt intentional. Not private. Selective. That was the word that stayed with me. Selective. Because he wasn't avoiding social media.
He was using it, just not in a way that included me.
And that changed how everything looked. Every explanation. Every moment I didn't question. Every time I accepted something because it made sense at the time. Now it all connected differently. Not as separate things, but as part of the same pattern. One version of him in front of me. Another version of him somewhere else. Both consistent. Both maintained. But only one of them real in my direction. And once I saw that clearly, there was no going back. Because I wasn't looking at a situation anymore. I was looking at a structure. One that had been in place long before I noticed it. The only difference now was I could see it from the outside and from the inside at the same time. Once I understood it wasn't just a moment, I stopped reacting to the photos themselves. Because reacting wouldn't change anything. And I already knew enough to understand what I was looking at. What I needed now was to understand how far it went. And how long it had been happening without me noticing. So I slowed everything down.
Completely.
I stopped scrolling quickly. Stopped jumping between posts. And started going through things the way you go through something you know matters. Carefully. One detail at a time. I went back to the first photo again. Not to look at it the way I did before, but to study it. The background. The lighting. What they were wearing. Trying to place it in time. Not just based on the date, but based on memory. Because sometimes you don't remember a date, but you remember a day. And that's when it started connecting more clearly. I recognized the place. Not directly, but enough. He had mentioned it before. Not as somewhere he went with someone. Just in passing. Like something he had seen.
Or passed by.
At the time it meant nothing. Now, it meant something else. I moved to the next photo. Then the next. Not rushing. Just following it. And I started noticing how often that happened. Places I had heard about, but in completely different contexts. Restaurants he said he hadn't been to yet.
Events he said he might check out someday.
And in those photos, he was already there. That was the first layer. Not just that he was with her, but that the timeline didn't match anything he had told me. Then I went deeper into the comments, not just reading them, but understanding them. The way people spoke, the way they referred to him, the familiarity in their tone. It wasn't new. It wasn't occasional. It was established. People don't talk like that about something recent. They talk like that about something they've seen before. Repeatedly. That's when I clicked on one of the profiles commenting.
Not randomly.
Just one that stood out. And I found more. Photos from a different angle.
Same day.
Same place. Same people. And he was there again. That confirmed something important. This wasn't selective posting. It wasn't just her perspective. It was consistent across different people. Which meant this wasn't something private. It was shared openly. Just not in my direction. I went back again.
Further this time.
Scrolling slower than before. Because now I knew what I was looking for. Not just him. Patterns. Repetition. Consistency. And it didn't take long to find it. The same kind of photos. Spread out over time. Not daily. Not excessive. But regular enough. Frequent enough. That it formed something stable.
Something ongoing.
That's when I started matching it more intentionally. Not just noticing. Actually comparing. I opened my messages with him. Went back through conversations. Dates. Times. And I lined them up.
Side by side.
With what I was seeing. And that's when it became undeniable. A night, he said, he was working late. Matched a photo of him out. A weekend he said he was with friends. Matched multiple posts with her. A day he told me he stayed home. Matched something completely different. And once you see that kind of overlap, you don't question it anymore. Because it's not one contradiction. It's a system. Two versions of the same timeline. Running at the same time. One for me. One for everything else. That realization didn't feel loud. It felt precise, like something locking into place. Because once you understand the structure, you don't need to keep proving it. But I kept going anyway, not because I needed more, but because I wanted to see how far it extended. I went back months, further than I had before, and the pattern didn't break. Same kind of posts, same tone, same presence. And that's when something else became clear. This wasn't new. This wasn't something that started recently. This had been happening long enough to look natural. That was the part that stayed with me. Not the fact that it existed, but how normal it looked, how easy it seemed. No hesitation, no gaps, no signs of something being hidden, because from their perspective, it wasn't. It was just part of their reality. I also looked at his profile again, more carefully this time, not just at what was there, but at what wasn't. No trace of me, anywhere, not even something small. No indirect mention, no overlap, nothing. And for the first time, that absence felt intentional, not private, not personal, deliberate. That was the word that settled in. Deliberate. Because you don't accidentally separate two parts of your life that cleanly. You choose to. I didn't take screenshots yet. I didn't rush to save anything. Because I wasn't thinking about confronting him at that moment. I was thinking about understanding. And by that point, I already did.
Completely.
I wasn't guessing anymore. I wasn't questioning anything. I had seen enough to understand the full picture. Not every detail. Not every moment. But the structure. And the structure was clear. Two separate versions of his life. Both consistent. Both maintained. But only one of them real in my direction. That was enough. Because once something becomes that clear, you don't need more information. You just need to decide what to do with it. And by that point, I already knew I wasn't going to stay in something that required me to ignore what I could already see. By the time I saw him next, I wasn't trying to figure anything out anymore. That part was already done. What I needed now was to see how he would respond when everything was placed in front of him. Not emotionally, just clearly. We met the way we usually did. Same place, same tone. Nothing about the setup had changed. And that was intentional, because I didn't want the situation to feel different before it actually was. He greeted me the same way.
Calm.
Relaxed. No hesitation. No awareness. And that told me something immediately. He didn't think anything had changed. He was still in the version of things he had created. We sat down and started talking. Normal conversation at first. Small things. Nothing important. And I let it happen, because I wanted to see how he would move through it naturally, without being pushed. And he stayed consistent. Same tone. Same presence. No shift. No sign that anything was out of place. That part was almost more telling than anything else, because it meant he was completely comfortable maintaining that version. Even now, after everything I had seen, after a few minutes, there was a pause. The kind that usually leads into something more personal. And that's when I spoke. Do you ever think it's strange you've never posted me? It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't emotional. Just direct. He looked at me for a second. Not confused. Just slightly caught off guard. I told you I'm not really into that. Same answer. Same tone. The exact same explanation I had accepted before. And that confirmed something. He was still relying on the same structure. The same reasoning. Because he didn't think it needed to change. I nodded, like it made sense. Then I asked, "But you do post sometimes." That was the shift. Small, but clear. He paused for a second. Not long. Just enough. Not really. That hesitation mattered, because it didn't belong in a simple answer. I didn't respond right away. I reached for my phone instead, opened the profile, the photos, and turned the screen toward him. No build-up. No explanation.
Just placing it there.
He looked at it quickly at first. Then again. Longer this time. And that was the moment everything changed. Because recognition doesn't take time. You either know what you're looking at, or you don't. And he did. I didn't say anything. I didn't point to specific photos. I didn't guide him through it, because I didn't need to. Everything was already there. Clear.
Consistent.
Undeniable. He leaned back slightly, like he needed distance from it. And that silence that followed was different. This wasn't confusion. This was exposure. He said something about it not being what it looked like. About friends. About things being taken the wrong way. And I listened. Because I wanted to see how far he would go. Not to convince me, but to maintain control of the situation. He tried to simplify it. Turn it into something smaller. Something manageable. But the problem was the pattern. It wasn't one photo. It wasn't one moment. It was repeated. Over time. With consistency that couldn't be adjusted. And he knew that. That's why his explanations didn't stay steady. They shifted slightly. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to try to find something that would fit. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct him. I didn't challenge anything directly, because I wasn't there to argue. I was there to observe.
And eventually, he stopped.
Not because he had nothing left to say, but because nothing he said worked. That's when the silence settled again. But this time, it felt final. I picked up my phone, not to hide it, just to remove it from between us, because I didn't need it anymore. The point had already been made. I looked at him, not expecting anything, not waiting for an apology, just seeing him clearly. And that clarity was enough, because once you see someone without the version you believed in, there's nothing left to question. I didn't ask who she was. I didn't ask how long, because I already understood the structure. And the structure tells you everything you need to know. I stood up,
Calm.
unhurried, and he watched me, like he expected something else. A reaction, a question, a chance to fix it. But there wasn't one, because I wasn't in that position anymore. I walked away from the conversation, not to avoid it, but because it was already complete. Nothing else needed to be said. Nothing else would change what was already clear. And that was the moment everything shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just completely. Because from that point on, there was no version of things where I didn't know. And once that happens, there's only one thing left: what you choose to do next. After that conversation, I didn't feel the need to go back and rethink anything. There was no second-guessing, no replaying it in my head, because everything had already settled into place while I was still sitting there. The clarity didn't come after. It came during. And once you reach that point, there's nothing left to process. The next few days were quiet, not in a heavy way, just distant. He tried to reach out. A message the same night. Then another the next day. Nothing dramatic. Just attempts to continue something that no longer existed. I didn't respond. Not out of anger. Just because there was nothing left to say. Because anything he could say would be built on something I had already seen through. And I wasn't interested in rebuilding that version again. I went back to my normal routine. Work. Friends. My own space. And for the first time in a while, everything felt consistent again. Not because things had improved, but because there was nothing left that didn't match. There was no second version of anything. No gap between what I was told and what I knew. Everything was just clear. I didn't go back to the photos. I didn't check her profile again. Because I didn't need to. The purpose of seeing it was already complete. It had shown me exactly what I needed to understand. Anything more would just be detail. And detail doesn't change the meaning. I also stopped thinking about the questions I could have asked. Who she was. How long it had been happening. How many times. Because those answers don't actually change anything. The pattern already answers them. And once you understand the pattern, the specifics don't matter anymore. That was the part that felt different. I wasn't looking for closure from him. I wasn't waiting for an explanation that would make sense. I already had something more stable than that. I had clarity. And clarity doesn't depend on someone else. It comes from what you've already seen. A week passed, then another, and his messages stopped. Not suddenly,
Just gradually.
like he understood there wasn't anything left to continue. And that made sense, because there wasn't. Whatever version of the relationship existed before. And at the moment, I saw the full picture. Everything after that was just time passing. I thought about it a few times. Not emotionally. Not in a way that pulled me back. Just in a way that made me understand it better. Because when something like that happens, you start to see other things differently too. Not just that situation, but how easily you can accept something when it fits what you want to believe. How easy it is to not question something when it feels stable, even when parts of it are missing. That was probably the biggest shift for me. Not what he did, but what I learned from seeing it clearly. That absence can mean something. That consistency matters more than explanation. And that what someone shows publicly can tell you more than what they say privately. Because public behavior doesn't need to be maintained the same way. It's just there. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. You don't need to go looking for more. You just need to decide what to do with what's already in front of you. For me, that decision wasn't difficult. Not because it didn't matter, but because it was already clear. There was no version of that situation where things made sense. There was no explanation that would align with what I had seen. And I wasn't interested in forcing one. So I moved forward, quietly, without needing anything from him, without needing a final conversation, because the situation had already ended itself. And that was enough. I didn't lose anything I didn't already understand. That was the difference. It didn't feel like something was taken from me. It felt like something had been revealed. And once it was revealed, there was nothing left to hold on to. Now, when I think about it, it doesn't feel heavy. It feels settled, like something that happened exactly the way it needed to, because it showed me something I wouldn't have seen otherwise. That sometimes the truth isn't hidden. It's just placed somewhere you're not looking. And once you see it clearly, you don't need confirmation. You don't need explanation. You just need to trust what you already understand. That was the part that stayed with me. Not the photos. Not the conversation. Just the clarity. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to make something make sense. I was choosing something that already did.
Peace.
Microphone OUTRO. 30 to 40 seconds. If you've ever felt like something didn't fully add up but you couldn't explain why, this story probably made sense to you. Sometimes it's not about catching someone in one big moment. It's about seeing the pattern clearly enough that you don't need anything else. If this story felt familiar or made you think about something in your own life, let me know in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, there are more waiting for you right here.